Hello, welcome to the Pharian Raspberry Pi Club. This is the first tutorial in our series about the Raspberry Pi. These magical little computers that bring together the world of computing and electronics. This first tutorial is called Which Pi to Buy. So there's various different models, so we're going to go through a few things and tell you which bits of kit you need to get. My name is Richard. And I'm going to be presenting, and behind the scenes my son Marcus is helping out with the recording and the editing. So please forgive us if we're a bit new to this. We haven't done this much ourselves in terms of presenting and creating videos, etc. But we hope you can help us along our way to make these better and join in with us whilst we make some fun projects with the Raspberry Pi. So the first thing you are going to need is a Raspberry Pi. I've based the course on 3 models of the Raspberry Pi, the most latest one being the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B, but there's also the Raspberry Pi 3 Model B Plus and the Raspberry Pi 3 Model B. Now obviously the best one, if you can afford it, is the Model 4, the 4B, because it's going to help you, it's going to be more future-proof. But we're going to try to make it that everything that we can do on this will work on the B Plus and the B. I'm just going to take you through a few of the details about this. The Model B, Raspberry Pi 3B, it's going to cost you, if you buy a kit, it's going to cost you about £55. If you buy the kit for the B Plus, the 3B Plus, that's going to be around £60. The Model 4, the Raspberry Pi Model B 4B, you're going to looking at about £100 to £120 for the starter kit. The starter kit is a very good idea if you're new to this, because you basically get all the essential items that you need to get up and running, and I'll go through what you get with that in a second. But you may find that you want to buy all the parts individually. You can just buy the Raspberry Pi itself and then buy the other bits that you need separately, etc. So I'm going to just sort of talk a little bit about some of the different bits that you need, so as you can make your own decisions. If you go to the web page, you will see links on the website at this URL, and there you will find links to all the different items, either as kits or individually, etc., that you may need. Now, the first Pi we're looking at is the oldest model, is the Raspberry Pi 3 Model B. Now this is your cheapest option, and there it is. We're working, they're all exactly the same size card. You will see this in a minute. It's called the standard form factor. Form factor is sort of a size and shape of the motherboard, so they fit into certain cases. You'll see the holes here that are drilled in, pre-drilled holes, which fit the certain case size. You will also see the various input slots. With the Raspberry Pi 3, you get 4 USB 2 and you get an Ethernet port, plus there's HDMI, there's audio video out, that's composite. You can also get a DSI connector there for video out, which we probably won't be using. It's a little bit more advanced to start off with than what we're going to do to start off with. And you have micro USB power supply socket there. With this model, you get 1 GB of RAM. That's the memory, random access memory. So you get 1 GB of RAM with this, which is okay, but you may find later on that some of the things we do, it's going to overload this perhaps. We'll find out. The next model up is the Raspberry Pi 3 B+, which I believe came out around 2018. So this is a slightly newer model. And for the extra money, you basically get faster Ethernet. It looks very much the same. The Ethernet connector is a bit quicker, and that's about it really. You get better Wi-Fi on it as well. Finally, and this is our recommendation if you do have the money to go for it, is the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B. This version has 4 GB of RAM. You can also get them in 2 GB of RAM, although you won't see those around very much. And they do a bigger brother of this, which is 8 GB of RAM. If you're thinking of running as a desktop computer for a while and to do quite a bit of work on, I would recommend, if you can afford it, try to find a kit with the 8 GB of RAM. We've put some links on the website for you. Now this, you get much faster Ethernet. I'm going to have to voice this over again. There's also a few other improvements on here which I think make it worthwhile. For a start, you've got 2 HDMI outputs, which are really good. The power supply is upgraded to a USB-C. You can still get the composite video out as well, and there is the DSI if you want to use that. We'll cover that a bit later on. That's a bit more advanced. But here also you'll see there's 2 blue USB, which is USB 3.0 plus 2 USB 2.0s, and the Ethernet port is faster. So it is a better option, I think. It's the same sized card, but as you can see, the ports on it are slightly different. The other parts that you must have, you will need a power supply. If you're buying the kit, then the power supply will come with it. And I would recommend getting a decent quality power supply. For both the Raspberry Pi 3s, you will get this kit. It's 2.5 amps, 5.1 volts, and it uses a micro USB-B connector, which, as you can see, goes in there. It's exactly the same on there. The kits that I'm showing on our website, this basically, you get a universal kit which will work all around the world, so which is quite cool if you're into traveling. As you can see, the connector is a USB-B micro USB-B. So that's important, and the ampage is important because this is lower. This will not be enough for the newer model. They've upped it, but it's the same if you're buying as a kit or you're buying individually. This will work on both of the 3s. For the 4B, slightly different power supply. It has a USB-C connector, and it is 5.1 volts, and it's 3 amps. It's a bit more power to the Model B because it works a bit harder for you. So again, it may be a little bit more pricey individually. We'll put some links to the kits and to the individual items as well. So you most definitely will need a power supply. There is the possibility of using a USB cable from, say, a plug socket, say something like this, if you've got plug sockets with that. But as you can see, like this one, most of it has 2.1 amps, so generally it won't really power. You may get it to fire up, but you may find that when it starts working that it's not enough power there for it. I really do recommend getting the top quality, you know, the best, recommend getting genuine power supplies. Later on when we're doing some projects, you're going to find that we're quite often, the Raspberry Pis are going to be running all the time, so you do want a good quality power supply. I would also recommend, if you're going to do this sort of thing, to have an extension cable or something that is surge protected. I know a lot of houses these days have RCD protection as well, but for the electrical equipment I do recommend this, because just in case, these are sort of delicate in a way and they could get a little shock, so it's a good idea to have something like this if you're going to play around with these things quite a bit. The next thing that you most definitely need, that you can't escape having, is an SD card. So this is your equivalent of a hard drive in a normal standard computer. This is what you get. And isn't that cute? Now, when you buy the kits, normally the kits come with a 16 gigabyte SD card, and so this is one that came with one of the kits. I bought two kits here. I bought the 3B and the 3B Plus, which I've linked to, and it comes with this official Raspberry Pi 16 gigabyte SD card. And you will see on here as well, it's pre-installed with Noobs. Now, that may not mean much to you at the moment, but we're going to tell you what that means. Basically, it comes installed with the software you need to get it up and running. So basically, you don't need to do anything other than put this in and fire it up, and then you'll go through a number of options that you can choose to get your operating system up and running. Now that's pretty good. 16 gigabytes is a pretty good option. I would recommend perhaps going up a little bit. You could go to 32 gigabytes, maybe a better option. The 16 gigabytes will be fine for most of what we're doing, but after a while you may find that it starting to fill up. Just note also, with most of the kits for the Raspberry Pi 4 as well, you will also get a pre-installed version of the operating system generally on a 16 gigabyte. But you may want to go up to a 32 gigabyte. The maximum, technically, it's unlimited, the size of SD card that you can use. But most people recommend up to 512 gigabyte is perhaps the maximum that most people have sort of tested with. Basically, if you buy your own card, then we have to install the software on it. Or you can install Noobs, which is like a little software loader thing. We will of course walk you through that. And even with the Noobs, the installation, we're actually going to do it with a blank disk just to show you how to do it, because it's a really cool thing to learn. Yeah, it's a really good thing to learn. So, of course, we'll also show you how it works with Noobs as well. So we're going to sort of have multiple versions of the install, so as you can pick which one suits you. You can try them all, keep doing it. So I would recommend that. One thing I'll say about these, buy good quality ones if you're going to buy. These ones are actually made by Transcend, which is a really good make. This is SanDisk. This is another really good make. Don't buy cheap SD cards. I'm sure people, you may have known, you put them in the camera, they don't work so well. There is some criteria on this. So these are USHI cards. Yeah, all of them do work. I think even so this is micro SDHC, but I think you can also get the SDXC will work on them. There's pretty flexible little card reader in there. You will also most likely need one of these adapters if you're going to back this up, or to create your own version of the operating system for loading, which you will need to do on another computer as well. Backing up, we will do some lectures about how to back your Raspberry Pi up, So you will need that, and possibly even a little adapter to go into the USB slot on your computer as well. I'll put a link to the adapter, to a little adapter that you need on the documentation on the website as well. Now, so these are the essential bits you need. You don't need anything else. You can actually log into these remotely, but it does get a little bit difficult. It's a little bit more technical, so we'll go through that in a minute. But you don't have to have keyboard and mouse and screen. So that will be one of the install options we will show you. That's a slightly more technical way, and it will involve understanding a little bit of networking. Basically, you have to know some settings in your router, your modem router at home, to be able to run these things headless. So generally, I think probably for new people, it may be easier to get hold of the peripherals, the keyboard and mouse, etc., which I'll go through in a minute, at least for the first time, and then we can get it set up for those who want to be able to run what we call headless. You don't need to have anything actually connected to it to be able to type in and to run the operating system. You can remote access from another computer, but we'll go through that in the various options. If you're going to do the standard sort of thing where you're going to at least once use peripherals, then you will need some extra bits. You will need a keyboard, USB keyboard. I'll put some links up if you can go to an old junk shop and find an old thing, or if you are just going to do it once, then you could just borrow from someone else's computer just for the initial setup, and then you can run it headless. So you don't need to have it for long, but if it is going to be your desktop, then you will probably need a keyboard, and the other most important thing, a mouse. Again, USB connector, pretty standard stuff. You can get the cheap ones. Because there's only 4 USB ports on the Raspberry Pi, you may want to get one of these combination, Logitech do a very good one, combination keyboard and mouse, wireless keyboard and mouse. So you just have the little dongle that will pop into one of the USBs, and it will work. You may also, with the USB, just to note, you may want to get some sort of extension hub, USB hub, to extend the number of ports you got, because a lot of things do connect via USB. So this is actually a powered one, so if you've got items that can run off, it's it works a bit faster. It's USB 3.01. I'll put a few links to those if you feel you want one of those. You don't have to. You've got 4 ports on there, so again, just to get started, you don't necessarily need that, but that's a good thing that you may want down the line. The other thing that will come with the kits, but you don't necessarily need, is a case. Now, for the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus and the 3B, they're exactly the same. You'll get the same case with both those kits, or you can go looking for a different Raspberry Pi 3 case, one that fancy, one that's in the color that you like or the design that you like. You can get all sorts of clever ones with fans and all sorts of cool stuff, so if that's where you want to go, you can go there. This is the sort of standard Raspberry Pi 3 case. As you can see, it just fits in there, and it comes with some little rubber bits there, some little feet in there. So this is, as you can see, it will fit in very nicely. It's exactly the same for both models on the Raspberry Pi 3. Okay. I would recommend having a case, again, if you're quite new to this, because there are some delicate bits on here, and there is, I guess, there's not really much of a capacitor on there, but you could get a little shock, or you could short something out if you're touching it. But I'll talk to you about some other options about that in a second. Here's a Raspberry Pi 4 case. When I bought this 4, it came with a kit, so there's a little case, slightly different. It fits slightly different, as you can see. The 2 holes for the 2 HDMI. You can see it's got some mounting screws. This one's quite a good one. and it comes apart, and you can slot the Pi in there, and the memory card goes in there, the SD card, etc. So that's quite a good case. If you're buying individually, then obviously you can get whichever case you want. You don't have to have a case. There's nothing saying you do. What you can also do, you may have seen this on computers, you could maybe, if you're going to do a lot with Raspberry Pis, you may want to build yourself you could almost just get a flat piece of wood, and you can use these wonderful little things called risers, and you could actually you could mount it. You go, there's just two there, just to give you an example. You can put the Raspberry Pi on some risers, on a piece of wood somewhere, or you could get a bit of plastic. If you're into 3D printing, then lots of people sell 3D printed Raspberry Pi cases, and you can do all sorts of clever stuff. And if you're building stacks of Raspberry Pis, this is a little bit further down the line, you can build your own thing. But you can get hold of these risers on Amazon and all sorts of hobby shops, etc. You see I've got a little pack of them at different sizes. So that's just another option. If you feel like doing that, you could build yourself a little hobby board with some Raspberry Pis on it, etc. And mount them like that. They can stay cooler when they're in the open, but obviously you must be careful. These pins, especially if you bend these, you're going to get into trouble if you knock something. So if you're new, I would recommend, if you're getting the kit, it's a good idea because you get the case as well. One other thing though, if you're sort of doing this sort of thing, you may find that you'll need something like a hot glue gun is also another way to mount them. You can do that if you're careful. You can use little sticks of balsa wood or something to mount. You don't have to buy these special risers, or also use silicone glue there as well, as sometimes comes in handy. When we're getting a bit further down the line into the electronic side of things, we may well be using those sort of things as well, because we'll have sort of additional circuit boards and stuff going on. You may well need an Ethernet cable to connect to the back of your router modem at home. You can pretty much standard. If you can get Cat 6, category 6, that will be more than enough. Cat 5e will also be okay. It does gigabit connection. Again, we'll talk about all these things in detail, but you will maybe need an Ethernet cable. You don't have to do it by Ethernet though. You will also see, where has it gone? I think somewhere over here is the Wi-Fi. You can see it on that one. It's that one on there, and it's that there. It's the Wi-Fi connector, so you can connect to your wireless at home as well. So you can be connected to the outside world. Now, the next thing, which you may or may not need, but most probably most of you will need, is a screen. So I've got an old one here that I'm using. Bit of an old beast that I picked up from an old client a while ago. And we'll walk you through it, but there's also some other options as well. The thing with the screen, it's different connectors. For the 3, it's an HDMI, a standard HDMI connector. So you could, if you don't have a screen, you most likely will have HDMI on the back of your television. So you could use that standard HDMI connector. In she goes to the back of your TV. If you happen to have a nice monitor with an HDMI connector, you're fine. It's HDMI standard on both of the 3 models, but for the 4, you have 2 HDMI outputs, which is really good, but it's micro HDMI. So you will need some sort of adapter. And this is one version, that's a micro HDMI to HDMI. So you can put that, will go in there, and then your HDMI cable will go in. To be careful, a little bit careful with this, never force any of these push connectors. Okay, the chances are, however, if you're using an older monitor like this, you managed to pick up somewhere, it won't have an HDMI connector on it. Now, if you're building this as a really nice desktop for yourself, you may want to splash out on an HDMI cable, on an HDMI ready screen, but more than likely, if you're just starting out, you don't want to spend too much money on the project, then you may have one of these older screens and it will have different connectors on the back. This screen I have here actually has the blue connector on it, which is VGA, and it also has a version of DVI. Now there's lots of different versions of this as well. You will need an adapter from HDMI to one of these. If you've got VGA, then an HDMI to VGA is pretty easy to get hold of. The HDMI to DVI, there's various different types of that, and they have different pins. Sometimes there's a cross there, and sometimes there's other little things on there, so you have to be a bit careful with that. We'll try to get as many different versions of connectors up on the documentation as I can. If you're not sure, I'm more than happy for you to take a photograph of the back of the screen that you have, so I can see what connectors you've got, and we'll try to work out how to get it connected for you and try to point you in the right direction. Getting hold of a screen, you could probably pick up something like that for £5 or £10 down a car boot sale if you're lucky, local computer shop. Obviously, if you're going to go onto Amazon or to somewhere else to get something new, it's going to come in a bit pricey. Something around that size is about £50. This is an old one. It's not very good, to be honest. It's good enough for what I need for the moment. But if you're going to use it as your desktop, you may well want a nice screen because you may be watching videos, etc. And you want a nice screen. So obviously the video output on the 4 is better than on the 3s. Okay, so again, that's another decision that you guys have to make. But there you go. We'll put some links up on the website. Another little option that you may see, these are about £60, I think, on Amazon. I've seen these. I got this. This is quite a cool little thing. It's like a little 7-inch touch screen. You can actually touch a screen. It's really cool. It's HDMI, so it will work straight away. You also it has a USB-C cable on it though, so this will sort of work with the 4. You may not be able, because you need both cables to come through to this. I'm going to do a demonstration on this sort of thing as well. With the 4, we can add this as a screen. It is really cool because it's touch screen, and you can do all sorts of cool projects with this. Okay, so that's pretty much what you need to get started. We haven't really touched on the electronic side of things, of course, and moving on down the line, we are going to use these 40 pins. And this is the magic. So not only will this work as a lovely little computer, we can do all sorts of clever things with this as a computer. You can use it as your desktop, etc. We also have these 40 pins. These are called the GPIO, the General Purpose Input Output. And we're going to do a lot of stuff around this. And this is what you connect to other stuff to do wonderfully cool electronic stuff as well. So each one of these pins has a certain purpose. We will be needing a few little bits down the line. Most of these are quite cheap, and we can do some of the basic stuff that you most likely will need. You will need some sort of these ribbon connectors. Okay, 40 pin ribbon connectors. You see they connect on there, and then they can go to other things. You may also need these sort of things, jumper cables, so you can just do individually. You may need things like this, which are relays. This is basically sort of an electronic switch. We have these sort of things which are extension GPIO boards. So basically it makes it easier. You can connect the ribbon cable like this, and then that will connect there, and then it makes it easier for you then to connect to the different pins that are doing different things, and we are of course going to spend a lot of time understanding that. What's useful about these things is it has the purpose of each pin on the back. It's a bit easier because on these you have to know which one's which, and you have to know which one's number 1 versus which one's number 40. This does make it a bit easier. There's all sorts of these sort of extension boards where you can have multiple GPIO outputs, so you can have 40, 40, 40. Again, we're going to get into that and do that. These bits are pretty cheap though, and what I'm going to do is look around. We're going to find some kits. There's a few electronic kits out there specifically designed for these. It has lots of little projects in there as well yourself, and you can go off and play. We can do things with like this little stick-on keypads, and you can see the holes in there. These will match up using these jumper cables. You can connect these to this and this to there. These are, you can get male to female. We'll go through all this. You can do wonderful things with things like this. We'll have motors. There's lots of these little things that you can use. So we will have a number of versions of the installation tutorial because there's different ways of doing it depending on how you would like to do it. So and it's good to know sometimes you can see the different ways to do it. So it's a really good learning experience. But then pretty soon once we've got it up and running and we've got an operating system on there, then we're going to start connecting up these lovely little pins and probably do something with some flashing lights to start off with, very simply, just as a very simple project to introduce you to these GPIO pins. Just to note a few other bits that you may need. You may need a few tools. I got this kit from my son. It was fairly cheap, I think. So it has it's like an electronic toolkit. What you'll need more than likely down the line, if you really get into this, is a soldering iron and a few screwdrivers. There's wire strippers, there's some snippers here. So you may well have all this around your house. You most likely will need a soldering iron. I'll put some links in for this as well. You don't need this straight away. We're not going to be soldering anything for the first few tutorials anyway, not for quite some time. To start off with though, to get us started, we're going to be using things like this, very cheap. We can pick up these. I'll find some really good links to some of the cheaper stuff here, and you can get the idea. It's what you call breadboards. They're really good. They're sort of, you get these ones with the points and you can pin these in and connect stuff. We'll have some longer ones of these jumper cables. You can see we've got power coming in. You can have different power supplies coming in. So you can build your circuits in test mode on these. And then later on, if you want to make those circuits a bit more permanent, we can stop. And then later on, if you want to make your circuits a bit more permanent, we can get into buying little circuit boards and you're starting to do some soldering, etc. But you don't have to do that. A lot of the stuff we can do is with things like this, okay? So, and I think that concludes all the stuff you're going to need to start off with. So in summary, if you can afford it, our best recommendation is to go for the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B with 4 gigabytes of RAM. If you can even stretch a bit further, go for the 8 gigabytes of RAM. You will be future-proofing yourself. You also, if you can go for the kit, it's a lot better. You get the proper power supply and you will get a case. Probably the best option for most people. And of course, you will get the pre-installed SD card. We'll look at which kits are out there. But if it is 16 gigabyte, you may think about going up to 32 gigabyte fairly soon. But this could be down the line. You can most definitely get started with the 16 gigabyte card. You will, of course, if you can get hold of a cheap screen and keyboard and mouse as well, that's probably a good idea. At least to start off with. It may be a new concept to a lot of people to remote into a computer, but we will be showing you how to do that as well. So you don't necessarily need these, as I've said. If, however, you would like a cheaper option, the Raspberry Pi 3 Model B Plus is a really good option. I would recommend getting the kit again. It's makes life a lot simpler with the case and with the power supply and the preloaded card, etc. So I think you'll be fine. It will manage everything we're doing. And if you want the really cheapest one, the Model 3B is okay. It will do most of what we're going to try to do. It will be a bit slower, and you may find later on that it may get a bit full up, etc. May not be able to process everything, so we may have to take some stuff off. But if you have one of these already and just want to get started, everything to start off with is going to work. So, you know, and then if you really get into it, you may think about upgrading a bit later.